Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a massive leap, really, from the historical origins of a concept that sounds like pure science fiction,
Right.
all the way to its revolutionary application in one of the most critical and, let's face it, slowest moving industries on the planet,
Yeah.
drug development.
Hmm.
We are ripping the lid off digital twins.
It's a technology that, it's been steadily improving in the background for decades. But thanks to this exponential growth in AI, we are now entering what the sources are calling the science reality phase.
Science reality.
Yeah, this is no longer just some hypothetical simulation tool. It's real.
So we're talking about creating a virtual doppelganger, basically, for a physical system. Like in engineering, that might be a jet engine or, I don't know, a complex manufacturing plant.
Exactly.
But in our focus today, it's about modeling a human subject. Or, maybe more accurately, the progression of a disease within a human subject.
That's the core idea. This twin is constantly learning, adapting, and simulating millions of possible outcomes based on real-world data. And this capability, this ability to accurately predict possibilities within these highly uncertain environments, it's fundamentally changing how we approach prediction and problem solving, especially in the high-stakes world of healthcare.
Because traditional methods just couldn't cope.
Right. They simply couldn't handle the randomness, the stochasticity inherent in biology.
Okay, so the stack of sources you've shared, they track this incredible technological journey. It starts way back, right, in space.
Yeah, origins in the vastness of space, literally saving astronauts and pivoting directly now to accelerating therapies for these really crippling systemic diseases like Alzheimer's and ALS.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is into how these digital twins, supercharged by AI, are actually revolutionizing clinical trials, cutting costs, bringing effective drugs to market much, much faster than we ever thought possible before.
Let's unpack this transformation. Seriously, the path from troubleshooting rocket malfunctions back in the 1960s to accurately modeling human disease progression today is, well, it's quite a testament to technological evolution.
Okay, let's establish the foundation then. We hear digital twin and, maybe we think of the latest metaverse hype or something.
Sure.
But the concept is actually decades old. You said NASA back in the 1960s.
That's right, way back.
Yeah.
And the original purpose was beautifully functional, really, to create a digital physical fidelity simulation of a spacecraft that existed right there on Earth.
Okay, so like a mirror image on the ground.
Pretty much. This allowed the ground team to debug flight issues in real time. So if the physical spacecraft experienced, say, a voltage spike way out in space, the digital twin on the ground experienced the exact same voltage spike milliseconds later.
And the big test, the life-saving potential, that was Apollo 13, right?
Absolutely unequivocal proof. When that catastrophic malfunction occurred, the famous Houston, we have a problem moment,
Yeah.
the challenge wasn't just fixing the problem, it was fixing it with extremely limited resources under immense time pressure. They were running out of time.
And they couldn't just tinker with the actual spacecraft.
Precisely. You can't experiment on the actual command module and risk the lives of the astronauts. So instead, the NASA ground team used their digital the physical simulators they had on the ground, which served as the operational twin.
Got it.
To quickly simulate the exact conditions, the temperature, the power draw, even the limited oxygen filter materials they had on board.
So they were running these simulations constantly.
Real-time, high-fidelity simulations on that twin. They figured out the precise, really complicated sequence of steps required to build that makeshift air filter, conserve energy.
And then just relayed the instructions up.
Exactly. It was the ultimate validation, really, of applying digital fidelity to solve a critical physical crisis.
That success story set the stage, clearly. But the twin itself, it had to evolve quite a bit to jump from, mechanical systems to biological ones.
Oh, significantly, yeah. We can kind of track this evolution through 3 key stages, more or less.
Okay, so they started, as you mentioned, as static replicas, just straightforward digital versions.
Yeah, like a 3D model with some baseline structural data attached. Informative, sure, but not adaptive. Didn't change.
Right, then came the mirror twin and the shadow twin.
Those started incorporating more real-time operational data, updating constantly, getting closer. But the current cutting-edge version, the one that truly enables this biological modeling we're talking about, that's the intelligent twin.
The intelligent twin, that's where the AI comes in and really transforms the whole system. How is it fundamentally different from just a better mirror twin?
The difference is autonomy and learning. That's the key. The intelligent twin isn't just a copy that updates, it's self-adaptive.
Self-adaptive.
Yeah, it's powered by AI,
Mhm.
meaning it has the ability to learn from its inputs, to reason about potential future states, even act autonomously to test variables. And interestingly, it can communicate with other twins.
Communicate with other twins.
Yeah, exchanging insights or coordinating predictions across different systems. It is effectively a digital agent.
Okay, that capability really explains why the sources describe this technological shift accelerating, like from a slow drip since the 60s to a sudden flood today.
Exactly.
The underlying concept was there, but the computational power and the sophistication of the AI models needed to achieve that intelligent agent status.
Mhm.
Those are recent developments.
Absolutely. We're definitely standing on the shoulders of 60 years of engineering knowledge, but the ability to apply deep learning to that knowledge base, that's the real accelerant.
Now, this brings us back to that biological hurdle you mentioned earlier. When experts first tried to model complex biological systems, say the human immune system or Alzheimer's progression, decades ago using traditional computing, it was widely seen as impossible. What was the specific constraint? Why couldn't they do it?
The constraint was really stochasticity and scale. Biology is just massively complex. You've got microinteractions at the cellular, the molecular level.
Tiny scales.
Right. Coupled with systemic population-level randomness. Randomness in environment, genetics, age, you name it. Traditional physics-based models, like differential equations, they really require the system to be largely deterministic,
Predictable.
or at least statistically predictable across known inputs.
Yeah.
But how do you capture that inherent randomness, that unpredictability of biological activity in a traditional equation? You can't. It doesn't fit.
So if those classical physics models, differential equations, can't handle that inherent randomness, what's the specific superpower that AI and machine learning bring? What changes the game for modeling life?
AI brings the power of probabilistic prediction, especially in these uncertain and, frankly, chaotic systems. Machine learning models, particularly deep learning, they're incredibly adept at finding patterns and predicting outcomes, even when the underlying causal mechanisms are only partially known or just too complex to calculate manually.
So they don't need the perfect equation.
Exactly. They don't need a perfect differential equation. They just need enough high-quality data to model the probability of an outcome, given a set of inputs.
And that's critical, isn't it? Because the human body is probably the ultimate uncertain system.
It absolutely is. And the beauty of the digital twin approach in health is that it's not a static picture. It's designed to evolve as the subject evolves.
Ah, okay.
It adapts to the same factors of randomness, age, disease progression that the physical subject is experiencing. It's that ability to predict outcomes within that uncertain biological system that represents the breakthrough for these clinical applications.
That ability to model biological uncertainty, that brings us right into the work of companies like UnLearn, which our sources highlight quite a bit. They haven't tried to tackle, like, all of medicine at once.
No, very focused.
They've strategically targeted optimizing this incredibly expensive, time-consuming process of clinical trials.
It's a really smart, focused application. Their core technology centers around what they call digital twin generators, or DTGs. And these are not just basic simulators. They are high-powered machine learning models trained specifically for the clinical trial environment.
So what are these DTGs actually generating? What's the output?
They generate probabilistic, likely outcomes over time, specifically for patients who share specific disease indications, things like Alzheimer's or ALS, where the progression is really complex, but it is measurable over time.
Okay.
The function's highly targeted, predicting how standard clinical measurements, lab results, overall disease status, how those are likely to evolve over time if the patient receives the standard of care or a placebo.
Ah, so they're modeling the natural history of the disease, essentially. What would happen anyway?
Precisely. They're modeling what happens without the experimental drug.
And the core mission here is accelerating clinical trials by boosting efficiency. So how does generating these probabilistic predictions, these what-if scenarios, translate into a faster, cheaper trial process for the pharmaceutical sponsors?
Well, the math is actually pretty straightforward, but it's incredibly powerful. By incorporating these highly reliable AI-generated predictions of the placebo response into the trial protocols, pharmaceutical sponsors can run trials with significantly fewer subjects than they needed before. And crucially, they do this while maintaining or sometimes even increasing the necessary statistical power.
Okay, statistical power.
Yeah.
Let's quickly define that again. That's the confidence that if you see a difference between the treatment group and the control group, that difference is real, right? Not just random chance.
Exactly right. So if you can achieve the required confidence level, that statistical power, with a smaller group of people,
Then everything speeds up.
the benefits just cascade immediately. Patient recruitment is faster, the overall trial duration shortens, the cost of the trial drops significantly, and effective drugs can reach the market quicker. It's just a massive gain in efficiency across the board.
Now, this technology relies entirely on data. It needs data to learn. Why the focus exclusively on leveraging historical clinical trial data, like control arms, rather than tapping into that vast ocean of information in general, electronic health records, EHRs, seems counterintuitive. There's so much more data there.
Yeah, it does seem that way, but this is a really crucial distinction.
Yeah.
And it defines the quality of their model, really. It comes down to data quality and the original purpose of the data collection.
Why was the data collected in the first place?
Exactly. DTGs are built primarily on high-quality, standardized clinical trial data from past control arms, dedicated patient registries. This data is collected by highly trained personnel using rigorous, standardized protocols, and it's specifically designed to answer scientific questions about disease progression.
Right, controlled conditions.
Very controlled. And EHR data, by comparison, is, well, it's messy.
Messy.
It is. EHR data is often collected for entirely different non-scientific purposes, primarily administrative stuff, operational needs, billing.
Billing codes.
Right. Think about consistency. In a phase 3 trial, a specific neurological scale might be administered by the same trained technician every 3 months, using the exact same methodology. Precision.
Okay.
In an EHR, that same measurement might be recorded by different doctors under different circumstances, maybe using slightly different metrics, or maybe it's just recorded as a billing code that lumps things together. This inconsistency, this noise, makes EHR data far less ideal for reliably modeling long-term disease progression with the kind of accuracy needed for regulatory submission.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Which leads perfectly into their strategic decision, what the sources call the wedge strategy. And this seems to hinge entirely on the risk profile of the application.
It's a really astute analysis of where the technology can have immediate impact versus where the hurdles are just currently insurmountable, or at least very, very high. If you try to jump straight into personalized medicine,
Holy grail.
right, using these ML models to make, say, a diagnostic device or a prognostic model for an individual patient, the risk is extreme.
And the bar for accuracy becomes, what, 100%?
Pretty much, yeah. For an individual patient, a prognostic prediction failure, a catastrophic error in predicting their outcome could directly lead to the wrong treatment, could directly harm that single patient. So the regulatory and safety bar for individualized prediction is just nearly impossibly high right now. You essentially need 100% accuracy for every subject every time, which is tough.
But clinical trials, they provide a necessary reduction in that risk, a way in.
They do. Clinical trials allow them to use the power of these models, but with a far lower risk profile. Because the goal isn't 100% individual accuracy, the focus is on aggregate statistics of the population.
The average effect.
Exactly.
Yep.
We need to know how the treatment arm performs on average compared to the predicted control arm on average. If the model mispredicts one outlier patient in the control group, that error gets absorbed. It gets neutralized by the statistical rigor of the overall trial population analysis.
Okay, so the immediate goal is accelerating trials. That's the initial wedge strategy, because the model only needs to be reliable on a statistical population level.
That's the entry point. That's how you get started. It builds credibility, it refines the models with more real-world data, and it proves the technology is safe and effective in a highly regulated environment.
And the longer-term goals.
The longer-term, much more challenging and much higher risk goals are things like precision medicine and clinical decision support, where they will eventually tackle the individual patient level, but only once the models are proven incredibly robust on a population scale first. It's a staged approach.
Let's dive a bit deeper into the mechanics then. The genius, it seems, of this approach lies in the specific modeling choice they made. They aren't trying to model the effect of a new drug.
No, not directly.
They are focused purely on accurately building models of the placebo response, or maybe the standard of care response, if there is one.
Right. And the apparent simplicity of that objective actually masks some really significant underlying technical complexity. The core question the DTG answers is this. Given a subject's comprehensive baseline measurements, their age, genetics, current disease stage, lab results, everything.
All the starting info.
All of it. How are they likely to evolve over the trial period if they receive no novel treatment? It's the AI building the most accurate possible understanding of the natural course of that specific disease for that specific baseline profile.
Okay. And the power of this prediction comes from using the model's outcome to reduce statistical variance in the final trial results. Now, I understand variance is kind of noise or variability in the data, but how does the prediction of a digital twin actually manage to reduce that noise in a real-world randomized trial? How does that work?
Think of variance as just the spread of outcomes you see. In a traditional control group, getting placebo, you have a wide spread of results, right? Some people progress quickly, some progress slowly, even though they all receive the same placebo.
Yeah, people respond differently.
Exactly. This widespread, this statistical noise makes it harder to statistically detect the true, often narrow signal of the drug's efficacy.
Right. It's like trying to hear a quiet whisper in a really noisy room. The noise drowns out the signal.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. Now, what they do is run the standard randomized controlled trial. But at the end, when they do the statistical analysis, they don't just look at the two groups side by side. Measured treatment results versus measured control results.
Okay.
They aggregate the measured results, yes.
Yeah.
But they also incorporate the predicted digital twin outcome for every single subject in the trial, both arms.
Ah, so for every patient, even the ones getting the real drug, the DTG predicted what their outcome would have been if they'd gotten the placebo instead.
Precisely. And by comparing the actual measured result of a patient, whether in the treatment or control arm, against what the AI predicted their placebo outcome would have been, the statisticians can essentially isolate and account for much of that patient's individual variability. The model provides a baseline expectation for that specific person. This method allows them to effectively tighten the confidence interval around the average treatment effect.
So they're reducing the noise.
Because they have a much clearer expectation for each individual patient's trajectory under controlled conditions. This dramatically boosts the statistical power, the ability to see that signal without adding extra human subjects to the trial.
That is a huge data-reliant boost, but it begs the question, why fundamentally are they avoiding the ultimate goal, modeling a subject's response to the novel treatment itself? Why not predict if the drug will work for this person?
Yeah, it's the obvious next step, right? But the sources are very pragmatic on this point. Modeling a subject's response to a novel treatment is currently far, far beyond the scope of current technological capabilities, at least for most systemic disease areas. The leap in complexity is just staggering.
What makes modeling the novel drug interaction so much harder than modeling the placebo response?
Well, it requires building causal mechanistic models. Models that don't just predict an outcome, but understand why that outcome occurred, based on the drug's molecular interaction with that specific person's biology.
Understanding the why.
Exactly. And that requires collecting massive amounts of incredibly complex experimental interaction data, pharmacokinetic data, pharmacodynamic data, deep molecular data that, frankly, has never been systematically collected before across previous trials in a way that would allow you to build such a model.
So it's a practical decision, a commercially smart decision maybe, instead of chasing a model that requires completely unprecedented data collection efforts.
Right. Which would slow everything down again.
They are leveraging the existing immense strength of the historical clinical trial data that already exists.
Absolutely. I mean, consider a field with limited breakthroughs, like Alzheimer's research. Over the last 2 decades, dozens of massive, incredibly expensive trials have failed. But in every single one of those trials, the control group collected careful, high-quality scientific data on natural disease progression.
Right, that placebo data was always collected.
Always. And historically, what happened to that control data after the trial failed or succeeded?
I guess. It just sat there, filed away.
Pretty much. It was essentially treated as a one-off observation for that specific trial, often effectively thrown out in terms of its potential for systematic application across the entire field. It wasn't aggregated. It wasn't leveraged systematically to create a continuous evolving model of the disease.
Until now.
Until now. The DT approach turns that historical, previously untapped resource of control data into arguably the most valuable asset in the entire development pipeline.
And this has really profound ethical implications too, doesn't it, for patients enrolling in trials now?
It really does. By using these DTs to reliably increase statistical power, sponsors can mathematically justify reducing the required size of the control or placebo groups.
Fewer people get the placebo.
Exactly. Which means that if a drug ultimately turns out to be effective, more participants in the trial, a higher percentage, can be allocated to the treatment arm and receive the potentially beneficial drug right from the start. That is a major positive shift, ethically, reducing the number of people who take a placebo when an effective drug might be on the table. Okay, so this level of statistical rigor, using AI predictions to augment real data, it must require an absolutely immaculate technological foundation. We learned that the company, UnLearn, rebuilt its entire machine learning stack just last year in 2023.
Yeah.
That sounds like a massive undertaking.
Oh, huge.
What were the core reasons driving that architectural overhaul? Why start over?
There were really two intertwined drivers, according to the sources: fidelity or quality, and speed or iteration. First, the quality bar. Their initial architecture, while it was functional, apparently had what they politely term some warts.
Meaning it carried a degree of unavoidable bias or some inaccuracies typical of early-stage complex models. They realized they needed to eliminate that to gain full trust and maximum statistical power.
And to eliminate that bias and, crucially, increase confidence for regulators, they set an incredibly high standard for themselves, higher than just predicting averages.
Yes, an extremely high bar, generating synthetic subject records that are statistically indistinguishable from real ones.
Indistinguishable. Wow.
Yeah, this goes far beyond what's strictly needed for simple statistical prediction in a trial. To achieve this, the model must capture all the nuances, the complex correlation structures, the distribution of every single measurement in a way that is identical to a real patient record.
Where'd I go that far?
Well, thinking is, if a generated record can be easily identified as fake by statistical tests, then the model is clearly failing to capture the full complexity of human biology. So, meeting that global constraint of indistinguishable ensures the highest possible fidelity. It's a mechanism to build trust, both internally and externally.
Okay, so quality and fidelity was one reason. What was the second?
Operational speed. By integrating newer, more advanced tools and frameworks from the rapidly evolving AML landscape, they dramatically improved their iteration speed.
Faster development.
Much faster. They can now train models and experiment much, much quicker. The sources note that the biggest single gain was actually the ability to rapidly investigate new ideas, swap model components in and out easily, accelerating their own internal R&D pipeline, trying new things faster.
Right. Now, none of this technical wizardry matters if the regulators, the FDA here, the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, don't accept the results in actual trial submissions. They secured EMA qualification and seem to have FDA alignment. How did they structure their solutions specifically to navigate those regulatory concerns? That seems critical.
Absolutely critical. They basically built the entire approach from the ground up with regulatory requirements firmly in mind, focusing rigorously on controlling the key statistical parameters that regulators care most about in Phase 2 and especially Phase 3 trials.
And they made a really critical decision, a distinction that separates them from maybe some other startups trying similar things. They explicitly do not use synthetic controls or add synthetic subjects to trials. We need to be very clear on this difference.
Yes, this is probably the make-or-break distinction from a regulatory perspective. Synthetic controls involves literally adding entirely fabricated subjects, data efforts representing fictional people who never existed, to the control arm of a clinical trial, usually to inflate the sample size or replace a real control arm.
Okay. And the regulators don't like that?
Generally, no, not for pivotal Phase 3 trials.
Yeah.
The core regulatory concern is that using synthetic controls fundamentally does not control the type 1 error rate.
Okay, let's define type 1 error again in plain language. That's the regulator's biggest fear, right?
It's the type 1 error rate is simply the probability of a false positive. It's the chance of falsely concluding that a drug is effective when in reality it offers no benefit at all.
Approving a useless drug.
Exactly. And if regulators cannot be mathematically certain that your trial design strictly limits this error rate to the accepted standard, which is typically 5%, then the entire integrity of the trial is compromised. And their stance is generally, if a Phase 3 trial can recruit and measure a real control group, using purely synthetic controls instead is seen as jeopardizing that fundamental statistical integrity.
Okay, so how does the digital twin generator approach, UnLearn's approach, avoid this pitfall entirely if they're using AI prediction?
Their solution is purely statistical. It's not additive. They do not add fake subjects to the analysis. Instead, they use validated statistical designs, what they term adapters, that mathematically incorporate predictions from the DT model alongside the measured data from the real subjects in both arms of the trial.
So the prediction informs the analysis of the real data.
Precisely. These statistical designs, these adapters, are rigorously mathematically specified to provably control the type 1 error rate exactly where regulators need it to be controlled. They are enhancing the analysis of real data, not fabricating the inputs.
That makes a lot more sense from a regulatory standpoint. They're using AI to sharpen the statistical lens on existing high-quality data, rather than trying to fill gaps with manufactured data.
Exactly right. It leverages the AI's ability to predict and account for noise, rather than asking the AI to stand in for missing subjects.
Now, this statistical approach, focusing on leveraging historical data and predicting placebo response, it also means the technology is probably far more suitable for certain types of diseases than others, right? Where's the sweet spot?
Yeah, definitely. The sweet spot is always where two conditions are met.
Yeah.
First, you need large access to high-quality historical clinical trial data relevant to current trials. You need that foundation.
Okay. Data availability.
And second, the approach is most valuable for diseases with profound biological complexity. This makes it particularly appealing for systematic diseases. These are diseases where there are tons, maybe hundreds, of interconnected measurements.
Like Alzheimer's again.
Like Alzheimer's, ALS, many autoimmune diseases, where each measurement, whether it's blood pressure, a cognitive score, a specific lab marker, only has a very small, nuanced, interconnected influence on the overall outcome. There's no single magic bullet measurement.
And that's the kind of deep complexity that traditional statistical modeling would just drown in, trying to figure out all those interactions.
It is. But this is exactly the kind of complexity that modern AI models, deep learning models, thrive on. They are designed to find those subtle, nonlinear relationships between hundreds of variables that influence disease progression over time.
Okay, so deep systemic complexity is good. What kind of disease is maybe less exciting for this specific technology? Where does it add less value?
It's probably less exciting or adds less value for diseases where maybe a single, extremely prognostic biomarker completely describes how a subject will respond, or where the disease mechanism is very simple and linear.
So if one blood test predicts 95% of the outcome,
Right. If a single variable can predict 95% of the outcome with high certainty, you probably don't need a massive, sophisticated DTG to handle the tiny bit of residual uncertainty. But for diseases like Alzheimer's, where multiple factors subtly contribute to progression in complex ways, the DT approach is invaluable.
okay, so we've established that technology is built to be regulatory compliant, it's statistically robust, it leverages existing data, and it solves a massive problem: the huge cost and time sink of clinical trials. What does the near-term future hold for this application? Is this going to become standard?
Well, the sources we looked at are pretty unequivocal on this point, because the approach is already regulatory acceptable in principle all phases of clinical trials, and because its statistical foundation guarantees that those critical type 1 error rates are controlled, it's seen as inevitable across the entire industry. It's going to happen.
Inevitable. So we're talking about this type of AI-driven acceleration using predicted placebo responses statistically being applied in essentially all phase 3 clinical trials in the relatively near future.
That is the strong prediction. Yes, it will likely become a competitive disadvantage not to use this kind of statistical enhancement where appropriate. And in aggregate, across the whole industry, this shift represents a pretty big accelerant, as one source put it, for the entire drug development pipeline.
Just shaving off time and cost from every trial adds up fast.
Absolutely. I mean, if every major trial can be shortened by, say, 3 months or run with 20% fewer subjects while maintaining power, the cumulative effect on human health and just the economic efficiency of R&D is potentially enormous.
Okay, so that's the near-term acceleration of the process. But what about the longer-term vision, the dream state for drug development that was mentioned?
Right, looking further out. The broadest and most profound way to accelerate clinical development isn't just optimizing the trials themselves, however important that is. It's dramatically improving the quality and the likely efficacy of the drug candidates before they even enter that expensive clinical trial phase.
So improving the actual drugs going into the pipeline, meaning maybe improving the success rate from, what is it now, like 1 in 10 drugs entering trials actually succeeding?
Something like that, yeah. Improving that hit rate dramatically.
Precisely.
The ultimate dream is a future where computational methods fueled by massive amounts of biological data and even more advanced AI can solve those key biological problems ahead of time, can better predict which targets matter, which molecules will hit them effectively and safely.
So the drug candidates entering development are just much better bets.
Much better bets. Highly targeted, more likely to be effective, and inherently safer based on sophisticated preclinical modeling.
And if these computational models can effectively predict efficacy and flag safety concerns before phase I even begins, then the entire burden and purpose of clinical trials shifts, doesn't it?
It really does. In that scenario, clinical trials would transition away from being these lengthy, high-risk investigations primarily focused on proving efficacy.
Which is what they mostly are now.
Right. And they become more of a perfunctory safety check, maybe confirming the dosing and essentially being a final regulatory hurdle. The length, the cost, the risk of the whole development stage could dramatically decrease because the prior belief, the confidence in the drug's success based on the computational work would be so much higher going in.
That's a radically different future. And currently, drilling back to today, the key growth strategy for companies building these DTGs, like UnLearn, seems to be partnering directly with the largest players in the pharmaceutical space, the big pharma companies.
Yeah, it seems like a strategic necessity at this stage. They are actively partnering with large pharmaceutical companies that already own massive drug franchises and, crucially, possess many, many clinical trials worth of data within those specific therapeutic areas.
Right, because accessing that partner's proprietary historical control data is the secret ingredient, the fuel for the DTG.
It absolutely is. That historical, high-quality, standardized control group data is often inaccessible to the wider market, locked away in company archives. But when leveraged by a DTG builder through a partnership, it allows them to create an immediate, highly customized, and statistically superior tool for accelerating trials exclusively within that partner's specific therapeutic area or disease focus.
So it connects that original concept, using robust, scientifically collected data directly to the competitive advantage proprietary knowledge base of today's pharma giants.
Exactly. It leverages their past investments in data collection in a completely new way. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, this has been an absolutely clarifying deep dive. We've traced this concept of the digital twin from those initial, really quite dramatic life-saving simulations aboard Apollo 13.
Yeah, amazing story.
All the way to building these incredibly complex virtual control subjects used to dramatically reduce clinical trial duration and cost for some of the most complex systemic diseases we face.
And the central takeaway, I think, is that this is fundamentally a statistical revolution enabled by AI. By leveraging the vast, previously untapped data collected on control groups over decades, AI can increase the statistical power and confidence in trial results.
Bringing more certainty to uncertainty.
Exactly. It allows us to bring a degree of mathematical certainty and efficiency to highly uncertain fields like medicine in a way that is demonstrably regulatory compliant and ultimately ethically responsible for patients in trials.
And it's clear the digital twin approach for healthcare has a critical and rapidly growing place, not just, way down the road in individualized patient care, but right here, right now, transforming the large-scale logistics and the efficiency of the entire drug development pipeline.
That ability to model and predict these uncertain biological systems is proving to be the key accelerant the industry has really needed for a long time.
Right.
It allows the field to move forward more reliably, even when full biological causality remains complex and partially obscured. It's just an incredible tool for managing that complexity.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider. If the primary goal of future clinical trials eventually becomes merely that perfunctory safety check we talked about,
The dream state.
because computational methods have already effectively proven efficacy and safety beforehand, what ethical and economic responsibilities then shift away from the human trial designers and the regulators, the traditional human oversight, and onto the drug discovery and validation algorithms themselves? Who is ultimately responsible then?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.